It is time we talk about the dance in the Vampire Bund. I will be covering volumes 1 through 14 of the main series. Before I get into the video, the meat and potato, I would like to say thank you to those that support the channel. If you do want to support this kind of content, then consider subscribing, leaving a like, comment, and if you may consider Patreon for those that want Discord access. But again, only do that if you really want to support the channel. So as far as the disclaimer for this video goes, this is a simple listen type video. You do not have to watch, but the eye candy will be there if you so desire. It is a long form explain / analysis, so it will be going over the story of volumes 1 through 14, and I will be explaining part of it while also analyzing and giving my own thoughts and opinions on the manga, as well as some discussion about the actual anime as well. So look forward to that deep dive into the dance in the Vampire Bund. When we dive into the beginning components of the dance in the Vampire Bund, there are some noticeable differences between the anime and the manga, and I will try to go through these chronologically as best as possible. There may be some juggling around, but most of this should be going through piece by piece by piece. When we look at the anime itself, the anime very much starts everything with this whole sort of theatrical component. It's a bit of a game show. People were discussing about, are vampires real? And there's some interesting discussions actually being made in the anime itself about depression and Great Depressions and economic trying times and all these kinds of things that would lead to people coming up with these crazy delusional ideas of vampires and werewolves and aliens and all these kind of crazy things that we have this tendency to be very imaginative when things are down in the dumps. But that isn't the real important thing. It's more that there's kind of like this bait, this kind of like, hey, there's a vampire amongst them, and Mina Tepish is kind of there to kind of pokes them out to show, hey, vampires are real, we are a real thing, and you should know of that. And then there's of course the main male protagonist, the love interest for her, the werewolf himself, Ecchi. He is introduced as sort of this guy is like, oh yeah, he's just walking down the street, they kind of talk to him, he's like, huh, what, vampires, kind of thing, and it brings her down a little bit. I actually really like how the anime actually does this. Now, there are some things I dislike about the anime when it comes to the differences between the manga, but this is one of those things that I actually really kind of like, because it starts things very lightheartedly. It's not super dark, super gritty from the very beginning, compared to the actual manga itself, because the manga starts right off with his introduction. He gets introduced, he's like, yep, this is your job, you're now going to serve Mina Tepish, you are her loyal dog, you do as you're told. And he's referred to as the love toy kind of thing. I'm kind of paraphrasing there, where it's like that love toy. Ooh, you're her new little plaything, her little thing to kind of dangle around. And there's a lot of flirtatiousness between them, especially her. She is very flirtatious, very playful. Even in the anime, that beginning component is still very playful. But it's a bit more playful in the anime at the beginning, then it kind of gets a bit more dark, kind of goes back on track to what the main story is about. So in the manga itself, it starts off very much of an introduction of, here is your queen, your leader, the one that leads the vampires, and him straightening away going, yeah, no, I'm not kneeling to you, you're not her, and then pointing towards the girl standing right next to him that just gave him a flower going, you're her. And that's how they get kind of introduced, as that kind of like, oh, this is Mina Tepish, purchase the Bund. There's all this political mayhem going on. There's also the press conference as well, and a CNN reporter, sort of a main sort of catalyst of the whole thing leading into this big climactic event where she has been turned into a vampire. She is now a bomb, and they're trying to actually take the life of Mina Tepish. Very much straight after she is introduced, he is introduced, they've kind of been brought together, everything falls into this sort of chaotic fiasco of humans are after her, people are trying to get to her, there's now vampires also after her, and with the conference or the press been brought in because of the purchase of the Bund and her being there, yep, you know, I bought this Bund, we paid out the entire government's debt during this financial strait, and they're like, well, how did you have all this money? It's like, well, hello, we've been around since you've been playing with sticks and stones. We are an advanced civilization, a much more older civilization that has been around for ages in the shadows, we have now presented ourselves to the public, and people are still in this sort of skepticism. And it makes more sense why they're skeptical, because in the anime, they introduce the whole game show and then go, look, vampires, but yet people are still skeptical at the press, which happens also in the anime itself. But in the manga, there's an understandability of why the press is skeptical, because they're like, well, we've never heard of you. There's no proof that you're a vampire. You're just some chick sitting in a chair acting all high and mighty. And that is where it leads into that situation where one of the CNN reporters gets converted to a vampire. And they've done this whole like check and everything because it's only humans allowed. But then they find out that someone has been turned during the process, and they find out there's a bomb in it. They take the bomb, they rip it out, they throw it down. And the only reason why they can put a bomb in someone is because of the fact the CNN reporter is a vampire. I do love the fact that they specific in the manga that it's a CNN reporter. It's kind of funny when you think about everything that's kind of going on, but I think it's just a little touch that I think is just kind of like, it's one of the mainstream media outlets that back in that time, it's a quick, easy one. That's when you get that presentation of this is the Bund, this is the situation, this is the atmosphere and the hostility and where the enemies could be. You don't know exactly who they are, but you know they're there. There's a lot of mystery and chaoticness going on. You also, during that process, have the Marquis, a sort of a royalty type system, a political structure within the vampire society, which makes complete sense. These people have been around since the dawn of time, the time when humans were playing with sticks and stones. The vampires have been around, so clearly there is a hierarchy structure. There is royal family, there is bloodlines, there is political espionage kind of going on, and maneuvering and chess pieces being moved into place to try and gain power. And you've got the Earth Clan, you've got these individuals that are there to protect it, but the vampires are like, we're better, we're more suited, but then shows that actually they can be quite incompetent as well. So they're not infallible. And a leader being willing to just kill off his entire group because, well, you failed, you're all out. It really shows the hierarchy structure, the power systems going on. Mina Tepish using that to her advantage, being able to play this situation to her own hand and being like, well, you know what? I just got you out of my hair, now I can have my little boy toy, and I can now continue my endeavors of building out and establishing this Bund, because people seem to not be particularly happy that she has brought the vampires to the front line to show to the public that yes, we exist, and we want to coexist amongst the people of Japan, which leads into the school, which is very much quickly introduced. She just goes to the school, introduces herself, yep, I'm a student now, and then goes back to her office, and that's when the student council rolls in and says, we don't approve of this. How dare you introduce yourself? Where is the director? And that is where they learn very quickly that Mina Tepish is the director. She is the founder. And very quickly they get a reality check when she said, this entire place is built for vampires. Did you not think it was sus that certain things were done in certain ways, things were underground, windows were done in a certain way? And they go, oh, she's right, but they still oppose it. And that is where things start to become more chaotic, more darker. The grittiness, the darkness of it all starts to happen, where there's also political opponents, those that are trying to oppose it, those that are trying to say, okay, fine, you can have the Bund, but you're not allowed to leave the Bund. We don't want to associate you. We don't want any cultural exchange. No, you can't have vampires at this school, because the school is outside of the Bund. They're trying to stop that. That is when Mina Tepish goes, fine, we will play that game of checkers. We will do something quite nefarious. We will turn the grandson of a politician into a vampire. And the manga itself really shows the hatred and hostility that Mina Tepish can have, while the anime is a little bit more gentle, a little bit more not so dark, but there's still that dark undertone. The school is much more fundamentally important at the beginning stages, and there's this whole little game of cat and mouse going on, and another character that is introduced into the anime that is not present in the manga itself, which I will get into at a later point in the video itself. Then we go into another part which I find kind of interesting when it looks at, for example, the school has been kind of, some of them have been converted into vampires. There's kind of this power struggle going on. There's those that are in the shadows that are vampires that are going, well, we want more power, so we're going to convert some of the students into power, and how it corrupts them in that sense. And there's one kid that was being bullied through the previous parts of this manga that has suddenly been turned into a vampire. He's gained this power and he's now taking it out on those that bullied him. So the bullied has become the bullier. You have Akira, the main love interest as I like to refer, and joking around, but is somewhat true. He steps in and stops that. And that's where the kid then says, hey, don't do this. I liked you. You were nice to me. So at least there's some sort of resemblance of who he was and his memory. He hasn't been completely taken over by those urges. And that's one of the things that kind of keeps being brought up throughout the actual manga itself is power, lust, the immortality. And that is another thing that I will talk about at some point in the video, is immortality, because that is something that does very much get brought up throughout these chapters, is power, lust, control, immortality, and how it all kind of intertwines in together. He gets stopped, he then runs away, and then you go into more of this stuff to do with an underground organization called Talamir, a group that is trying to take out the princess. And that is where it leads into this power struggle, her setting up things, and her having a bit of a discussion with another student about what are vampires and how she sees them as like a plague, which is kind of interesting when you look at Mina Tepish and how she reflects on vampire society, vampires in general, and on herself and other vampires within her own group. She sees them as like a plague, and she talks about how 10% of the vampires that came to the Bund have died. 10%, that is a massive amount that have come to the Bund have died due to their lust, their power, their corruption within, and how they've kind of just lost control of themselves, and then in the pursuit of that have just died out. When they get given all this power, how it corrupts them and turns them into something that ends up leading to their downfall. A group of individuals that have immortality, somehow when they gain immortality, they become even more weak and more fragile because it corrupts them and it gives them a false sense of security. That is also when we go further down into the whole scene, with the train scene, them kind of setting up this whole big trap that is going to be capturing one of the individuals behind the Telomere group that is trying to take out Mina Tepish, which is Hysterica, and then doing a kind of bit of game of cat and mouse, try to find out what they're doing, why the vampires are exploding, discovering that there is a type of substance that is inside them that is kind of used as like a time bomb where they can click off a switch and boom, things go off, they die, but they also take out those around them. The kid that I previously mentioned that was being bullied, that then became a vampire, became one of those very things and ended up dying as well, which very much impacts Akia. As much as Akia wasn't super close to the kid, he still had a somewhat of a relationship in like, hey, you know, I protected you from being bullied. They had a positive relationship compared to other things, and it does suck when he's trying to save this kid and give this kid a second chance. It's then thrown away. And remember, this kid was a vampire. He was turned into a vampire. He was just given immortality, and yet his life was snapped away at a moment's notice. Then you also have the introduction of the Elite Eight, a group of wolf boys, urban clan, the boys, the lads, the chads that are there to protect Mina Tepish. The elite of the elite, as I like to refer to them, but not much is really delved into. They're just really cool to just kind of see in the manga as they're doing all these cool moves and be like, yeah, we're kick-ass. And they're very well trained. They're very good at tracking. They are the best at tracking, which they are used to try and help find Hysterica and her group, and to also combat the problems going on, and those also in cahoots as well. This whole fight scene really shows, and this whole sort of battle between Mina Tepish and Hysterica demonstrates Mina Tepish's ability to think very critically, very fast, and be able to lead traps. But you've also got to remember, she is quite old, and this is something that kind of gets joked about at the end of these volumes 1 through 3, is that she's a bit older than what probably certain Akia realizes because of their relationship and their past. But it also shows that Mina Tepish is not just very self-reflective, but she's also very wise and very cunning, but there is two sides to her. The gentle, kind, and loving type personality, but also the one that is willing to crush anything that gets in her way, that stops her from her goals and doing what she believes is right and just. So when we're going through volumes 4 through 6, the first thing, of course, we go into is the death of a friend. In the previous section, we talked about a particular friend that was in the school. They were bullied. They become the bully. It goes into, again, this whole thing of vampires and power and how it can kind of corrupt you and warp you into someone. And even though you have immortality, your life can be so fickle and so quick to end, even though you can live forever. And so the death of a friend, even if very minimal to Akia, is one of those where it's like, it shakes him up. He's not someone that's ever killed anyone, and that is something that the actual manga emphasizes on from his father's perspective is that he's like, yeah, my son hasn't killed anyone. And so when going into the next section, which is to do with the bet, where the three major vampires come to the actual Bund, they're not happy with Mina Tepish, they're very much exerting their power, trying to, over her, and using dirty, underhanded tactics to try and show, well, no, we're in control of you, we won this war, we took your mother's life, and you're going to do as you're told because you are a piece of meat for us to do as we so desire. And so they make a bet. They send 3 assassins in to kill Akia. Whoever kills him have the child of one of them. One of the interesting parts though about this is that they talk about how the fact is that she can only ever have one child, and that's something like vampires like her can only mother or give birth to one child. So for me, I'm just like, how does vampire society live if, so for example, again, they're not converting people, right? They're not biting people, they're just trying to give birth to new people. It's like, how do you do that? Like, you can't grow naturally. You have to rely on humans. Without humans, they would collapse. They need the humans to grow, and then they would then use them and convert who they desire over, because they can only give birth to one child. It's like that, like the one birth child policy. It's like an absolute recipe for disaster. For me, it's just really insane where that can go, and obvious that something will be delved into later on. But they basically show that their power over her, they try to give her a purity test or a chastity test to check and make sure that she is pure in itself. One of the other things as well is the fact that Akia is now got 3 people trying to kill him. He's not really quite clued on yet until people inform him that, hey, yeah, you're a part of a little bit of an elaborate bet that they've put on you, so now you need to fight off 3 individuals, which is where he bumps into what I like to call the lolly vampire knights, which is not actually in the anime. And this is one of the things that starts to become more obvious when you look at the anime and the manga, is that there are some big differences. Especially, as I mentioned previously, a certain girl that was introduced in the anime is not introduced in the manga. The individual has replaced her, which is a dude that is, in a sense, pretty much almost the same in kind of a basics, other than just like, okay, he's one of the 3 that is trying to kill him. He does assist, actually, a fair bit in this, a lot more than what would be seen in like an anime's perspective of the chick, but there's no love sort of weirdness going on. That's one of the things I didn't really understand why they tried to do this in the anime, is they tried to make the individual, which is part of the school setting, sort of almost a love interest of like, oh yeah, well, we kind of love the same person, but I'm kind of like flirting with you and I'm doing all this kind of weird foreplay, but actually I'm in love with a clone of Mina Tepish. And it's just like, it's a whole subplot and a whole thing going on that just doesn't make sense from an anime's perspective. It just feels like they're adding unnecessary components. And it feels like they're just trying to pad things out. But I feel like the padding mostly is there because the fight stuff in this particular part of the manga is far more intense. There's so much more fighting going on between the different groups. And the back and forth between Mina Tepish and the 3 other houses is much more intense and back and forth. There is a whole scene where she walks off, goes to her mother's portrait, and one of them walks in and just tries to like attack her, like a strangle, and just be like, you little bit. And it's like, oh, one of your assassins died and now you're trying to make claim. And that's when he talks about how he was told by another person, a person that was just mentioned in the previous parts of the story, that there was a secret of Mina Tepish's, which of course for us, we know that she has a adult form. For him, he doesn't know that. He knows there's a secret, he just doesn't know what it is, and so he's trying to get that out of her, which ends up failing anyway. But it obviously shows that, yes, there is a bit of a clue on of like, oh, well, they know that there's something up, but they don't know what is up. And so there are those little sections. There's more conversations between Mina Tepish and the other 3 houses, and their banter and their back and forth and their kind of political mind games that are going on. And then there's a lot more fighting going on with Akia, going deeper into the actual Bund itself until he gets to the point where he gets to the cradle, which actually shows a little bit more of it, because in the anime it just looks like the slums. That's all it feels like. It feels like they've just gone like into like a slum area. But in the manga, it's like an actual city. It's like an underground city. There's like actual things down there. You meet people. There's things going on. They kind of meet at sort of like a location and they do their final fight there where he has his arm cut off, which is what happens in the actual anime. So there is some similarities there, but you also find out that Segi is how you pronounce it, which is the guy that replaced the chick. He used to be part of the Japanese secret anti-vampire squad, who was killed in the very early stages of the story, and so he's kind of got his own secrets. He can transform into something else, which parallels to the anime, but it's just the genders are swapped, the relationships on how they communicate are kind of different, because there's not this weird, flirtatious foreplay going on. So I feel like the actual manga itself is far more structured in what it's trying to tell, and what it's trying to get across, and the relationships, and the dynamics, and it feels like there's a bit more correct chemistry when it comes to how they communicate, while in the anime it tries too hard to add an unnecessary weird romance that should not exist, and add another subplot that does not need to exist at this point in the story. It's trying to do too much, and as much as I still actually love the anime itself, when you look at the manga, you understand why the manga is done in the way it is, but at the same time, you kind of question, why did the anime go down in the route that it does? Because that basically guarantees that they cannot continue that story, because it's deviated too heavily. Then when you go into the events after the whole bet situation between the three individuals, you then have the individual that was one of the three major players in the bet itself, showing himself to Mina and having a discussion and exposing who he really is Sledgehammer, which is what I will call him from now on, because that is a much more palatable name than the other one. And so you find out that he is a trained soldier. He's highly respected even by the Earth clan, very deeply respected by them, and he has trained the previous soldiers because he had trained a group of soldiers to help with the attack at the beginning of the manga itself, which of course led to many of his men dying, which the Wolfgang did bury with honor because of their show of courage and training. They clearly showed such discipline that the Wolfgang had respect for them and gave them respect for burial. And so there's an instant relationship being built between Sledgehammer, the Wolfgang, them giving a good reputation, them putting in a good word, Mina kind of having a decent conversation with him, and them being able to come to sort of an agreement of being like, yep, we'll see where this relationship kind of goes, and he is able to kind of walk away from this much more better than what could be has seen as, for example, they could have just killed him, buried him, and called it a day. But he also points out some of the major players involved, which is one of the major three clans of the vampires that is involved with the whole assassination attacks, this trying to stop the actual Bund itself, and then also the fact that there have been other party members that have been threatened that led to Sledgehammer getting involved in the way that he did. But he also points out that he has a bit of a soft spot for a certain little wolf, that he kind of wants to see where that individual's growth goes. And I think that's one of the things that I kind of like, is that it kind of shows that human element, even though Sledgehammer can transform into something else, it shows that sort of human element-ish of connections, respect, loyalty, honor, pride. Sledgehammer is one of those characters I actually really kind of like, even from the early stages of its development, because of the fact that it has a very strong foundation of building who the character is, and it has a lot of good back and forth conversations that he has with other characters, being of course a little wolfy boy, where they have those many moments together during that whole bet situation for Mina's body. And I like that. I like that relationship that's been built over that period. And even though it's a very short period, it was a well-constructed period. But again, if you fall back to the anime itself, to kind of almost finally touch on it, is that it shows that with the anime, it changed the genders. It added an unnecessary weird foreplay romance component in it. It added another subplot that was not needed at all at that point in the story, and so it feels like it overcomplicates something that doesn't need to be complicated, but it adds an unnecessary additional romance component just for the sake of adding some tension, when what is already in the manga is strong enough as far as tension goes. Which is why I just feel like the change, as much as it's still palatable, it's still a decent anime, I feel like, again, the manga is just that leap above. It's not to diminish the anime, but simply to say that the manga just takes things one step further. But some people may like that kind of back and forth kind of relationship that was kind of being built up. For me, both are good, but the manga is much more preferable. Mina Tepish trying to get into this sort of day-to-day life, like, oh, we're going to go to school, there's some of the fangless that go along with it, there's this kind of building relationships back and forth going on, and this is where you find Yuki has this very skill for writing what would be perceived as yuri, or for those that don't know, guy-on-guy romance. And she has this big passion for it. She's very good at writing it. Mina finds out about it in the previous chapters where she ends up sneaking a bit of a peek at reading it while she's going off to collect some books that she forgot. Mina, being who she is, couldn't help herself, decided to translate it in as many languages as humanly possible, distribute it worldwide, and created an entire fan club for Yuki for her little series, which upsets her, but I feel like she kind of slowly comes around when, yeah, more and more people sort of show, hey, I read your thing and it was great. And there's actually a bit of a fun tie-in to kind of the final part. This whole volume itself is that there's a new character that's introduced, which is Angie, which is a guy that has a deep bond with our wolf boy. Mina and Yuki kind of have this feeling that, oh yeah, Angie's going to steal him away, and there's some bond that they've done these things that could not be unknown. It's like this whole like things going on in their head, and Yuki starts to have all these theories of like, when she finds out that actually the individual is actually a guy, they start theorizing all these weird things, and Angie turns around and goes, yeah, no, we're not one of your little romance books. And that's when Yuki finds out, oh, you've read it. And it's like, oh yes, everyone's read it, we're all part of your fan club. I just find those little moments kind of actually really adorable, because even though there are so many moments throughout the actual manga itself that are very heavy, there's a lot of major heavy topics, and some that I will be getting into, there is those nice little heartwarming moments, those quieter moments, and it kind of gets you kind of like relaxed a little bit. You're kind of just feeling, everyone's getting along, we're having some fun banter, some fun back and forth, relationship building, character building, a little bit of world building, and then it just goes back into the heavy stuff, which leads into the next part where Mina Tepish ends up going into sort of a kind of coma, deep sleep kind of thing, where she ends up having nanite machines in her bloodstream. And they go on a giant hunt to try and find who the person is behind it, but all they end up finding is a laptop. And this is where I actually think it's really interesting what this particular chapter really delves into, because it's not so much the events of the nanites itself that is most interesting, it's the dream that's made because of it, which is Mina Tepish living the life that she so desires. Which at the start kind of perceives itself as, giving Akia the life that he so desires or wants or deserves, which is having that romance with another girl, Yuki, living the school life, but then end up actually finding out that no, he's actually engaged to her, they're gonna get married once she gets older. It's this whole idea of, without the whole vampire stuff going on, werewolves, there's this whole weird dream story where she could actually be happy. She could have the guy that she loves, end up getting married to him, having her mother still alive and spending those moments with her, having the life that she so desperately desires and really yearns for. She can't have it, because that's not the world that she lives in. But she kind of goes into that mindset of like, I could just stay here. I just keep staying here. And if that was to continue, it could lead to major health problems for Mina Tepish, potentially brain damage. It is his job to go to the bedside and to call her back out of that dream. And even though she wants to kind of be there, she realizes that this is not the world that she was meant for, that this isn't the real world, and that she has to separate herself from it and say goodbye to it, and to let go of those memories that felt so sweet and so tender. And that's the thing that I really like about that chapter, is it's not so much the nanite story, it's more of the what Mina deeply desires, the mother that's no longer there, the relationship that she could have if responsibilities and other third-party members weren't trying to blockade that. And so you kind of really want to barrack for that. You really want to see that blossom at some point in any capacity. But it is not going to be an easy ride for Mina Tepish to get the things that she so desperately desires. And even though she's immortal and she's a vampire, that doesn't mean that she can still have it. When we talk about volumes 7 through 9, there are 3 major components that we need to go over for the beginning components, which is the nanite machines, or the nanites. I feel like is a really cool, interesting introduction into the world itself. At the start, it seems kind of basic, and there seems to be some interesting kind of dilemmas going on when it comes to how it manipulates the mind, and I talked about this in the previous stuff, but also it gets brought up later on when it comes to Yuki and it being used as a way to heal, which is one of these things is that when it gets first introduced, it is one of those that Mina Tepish and her group are trying to develop this technology to be able to combat the 3 other houses. But instead, it gets stolen, it gets developed into a weapon that is now being used on a wider scale to affect the vampires in general. And it's just like, it's like a virus. It really is, in the most basic sense, it is a virus that is spreading, it is infecting the vampires, it is turning them crazy. We find out that Yuki ends up getting attacked, and I'll explain why she ends up getting into major harm, getting hurt in itself, and they are able to then reverse engineer that technology that has been stolen to then use it in a human format to be able to help deal with some issues that have happened to her. But then there is also the repercussions of, well, if Mina Tepish decides to turn Yuki into a vampire, there may be some unforeseeable side effects later on. But the way I see it is that they could always find a cure, solve that problem if Mina decides to want to turn Yuki into a vampire. Which is, by the way, one of the things that I really love about the mangas as well, is that they constantly bring up things that I keep wondering about as I'm reading through it. Because one of the first things that I kind of thought about when I was reading through the first major volumes was, what would stop Mina from turning Yuki into a vampire because of their attachment, their bond that they've kind of got? Because right at the start, with this whole nanite stuff, was that they believed, certain parties thought that Yuki was the one that did all this and that she was the bad person, and then of course the Wolfgang were like, hey, you know, we know it ain't her. And even Mina knows that. There is clearly a bond between Mina and Yuki, and so I've always wondered to myself where that could possibly go, and that relationship. And I think it's great that they delve into these components as the mangas go along. Then you also have a refugee situation, which also deals into a new character that's been introduced, which has a tie-in into a previous section of these volumes, which is to do with the saga, which it's not actually a word, but it's more of an initials of certain people that were involved in a major training situation. Akia is going for sort of like a trial. There's like a trial they go through as wolves. They get thrown out into an area and they've got to sort of survive through the weather, become sort of like a man kind of thing. And so there are 4 of them that go on this adventure. All of these things kind of come together as like one big jigsaw puzzle. And his past is that something went wrong and someone out of the 4 ended up getting hurt or believed to be dead, which later on finds out that they're actually still alive. There's a fang in their head, it's causing their torment, it's brain damage, it's stuck there, they're through constant anguish, and it leads to Akia ending up taking that person's life. And so there's a big fiasco going on there as well, which then leads into that person's sister turning up later on, taking that frustration out on Akia, which leads her to ending up attacking Yuki because someone got Yuki to kind of be a bit of a interrogator, not like a real hard interrogator, but more just trying to sort of like poach a couple of questions out of this individual sister that was affected by the situation to do with what I would refer to as the saga, to do with Akia's past and the training incident. So it all kind of leads into the sort of the nanite machines, the saga situation, then you've got the refugees and the sister of that impacted person rocking up. Then you've also got Akia's younger brother also being introduced as well, and their relationship and how Yuki is kind of like all in the middle of this while this is all going on, and she ends up being the one that gets hurt, which they then come to this whole idea of, well, we could use the nanite technology to repair her. Mina decides to turn her into a vampire. There could be those repercussions that could have that effect as well. But this is another thing as well that I think is interesting that delves into, is this whole idea of humans also wanting to become vampires, because there are other people in this story that talk about like people like refugees outside the Bund being like, hey, I want to become a vampire, I want to kind of like join the Bund and kind of find refuge. this other group that is refuge are all vampires seeking asylum, which Mina also points out in the interrogation, or the, I wouldn't really call interrogation in this specific context, but more interview with the party member involved that was bringing them, because the one that is bringing the refugees over is the sister of the person that was impacted during the saga situation. You have the nanite situation, which leads into the backstory of the saga, which is the training event for Akia and the 3 other people involved, which Angie is one of those that I talked about, and there are 2 other members. One of those ends up getting majorly hurt, believed to be dead, reappears, ends up being a major catalyst in the attack on Mina, and that's when the sister appears with the refugees, uses sort of like a way to get in, which then leads to her attacking Yuki. But now, because of the virus, it has broken the balance between not just the 3 of the vampire houses, but also Mina and her group as well. After of which we then find out that Angie is one of the betrayers, one of the people that has been sort of setting up situations. So Angie is one of the people that is trying to cause havoc, cause problems, along with the individual's sister that lost her brother due to the situation with the Wolf Gang. You lead into a big surprise, which is Akia's younger brother is the one that actually ends up saving him, ripping a piece of flesh out of Angie's neck, which leads to Angie not being able to talk or struggle to talk. The brother ends up turning into a bit of a wolf form, ends up protecting him, and that is when more information comes out that the reason why the father brought the younger brother closer to them was because of the fact that they were starting to show signs of going into their wolf form. Akia decides to start training. That then leads into the major attack. The major part of the ending of this particular volume is the attack from Ivanik. Them finding out that, yes, they know about her adult form to be exact, and they have decided to attack, and particularly him. He is attacking. He is going full force to try and take her by force, and then take her back so that he can then do what he so desires to her body, because now he knows that she actually has a mature form that he can take advantage of. That also leads into the other houses kind of being sidelined because of deals being made, but Ivanik has been used and played like a chess piece, which has led into the certain 2 other players that I just mentioned, Angie and the other player, actually using this situation as a way to get to a nuclear reactor that is planted in the Bund, deep within the Bund, where the cradle is, because there's 2 layers to the city. There's the top layer that most people know about, and then there is the deeper underlayer that they are building out, that they plan to use a nuclear reactor to power, because the Japan grid is what's powering the top part, while there is the plan of the nuclear reactor to power the deep component of the city, of making this massive underground establishment, which of course makes sense, being that they are vampires. But their whole plan is to get to that, get it critical, and make it explode. With Ivanik, he ends up dying. He is used as a chess piece to kind of further the Telemine's plans of blowing this up, which he turns into this really crazy big form that's kind of like a giant demon kind of thing, and he ends up being defeated nonetheless. That's when all his soldiers go crazy. You end up finding out that the student council president actually has the nano bots in her, and been told by her lover boy to attack because she's about to make it go critical. So Mina Tepish tells the boy to attack her to stop her, and she ends up falling down into a bit of the lower area of the nuclear reactor. And this is when we discover another player in this entire game, which is a clone or a copy of Mina Tepish, and that is where the volume ends for this part of the story. And now we enter through volumes 10 through 12, which leads right off to the fact that Ivanik is not in fact actually dead at that point of being mentioned, but was believed, defeated, etc., but then found out to still be somewhat alive, used to come back as someone using their own body as a host, which then ends up bumping into a different Mina Tepish, a clone version, which is a much more cruel, evil, calculated version, and very arrogant as well, which is very obvious. Like people are starting to pick up on the behavior changes, the evilness, the connivingness, and I think what's really interesting about this whole part of the story, which is just like, one, the art itself is just phenomenal in the way that they draw her face. Like, Mina Tepish has a very soft and gentle and kind-hearted sort of look to her face when drawn, but now you've got this almost like rigid, cold, evil face. It's like a child that's just like almost possessed and demonic in a sense. And that bit of cracks slowly come through to different people noticing weird behavior changes, little quotes, little things that Mina Tepish is doing. Clone version is starting to get through to people being like, things just don't add up. And there is a bit of a rebellion that goes on. People work out that, yeah, this isn't the Mina that they know. Someone else already knows about Mina already being turned. That is a high-ranking individual that works alongside Mina and is basically shrugging it off as going, well, you know, this is Mina still. It doesn't matter. But it's that reality that evil Mina can still control normal Minas, good Minas, vampires, because remember, you can't hurt your own master. So it's obvious that there is something going, like, this cloning technology is extremely good, and even though the evil Mina is saying, hey, I'm actually the original and you should obey me, it's very obvious that people don't agree with that. And then you've got Yuki, who is uncovering all this and then goes to Akia through this whole situation with her injuries. So she's injured, she's got the nano machines in her, they're repairing her, but she's basically stuck in her chair. She cannot move out of her wheelchair, and she's using her eyes to communicate, and they've got like a little bit of a laser in her eye, and the laser can only be seen, the light itself can only be seen by Akia because he's a wolf, so there's different spectrums of lights that different creatures can see, and she is communicating through telling him in a room, in a hospital bed, because she's injured herself, that Mina is not Mina, that this isn't the Mina that they know and love. And to kind of give a bit of context to that whole lead up, because that's something I haven't talked about, is if you go back to when she originally received that injury, she was critical. They used the nanites to help repair and do some of the heavy lifting work to get her into a stable state. She is crippled. She cannot speak. She cannot move. She's stuck to a wheelchair, but they're using the eyes as a way to communicate with machines through like a little keyboard, and she kind of like points her eyes. Those that understand that kind of technology would know that that's how people communicate, is through using their eyes. They go to different spots and they point it out, and then it makes a word, and that's how you communicate. The evil Mina kind of blockades that at the first stage, where Yuki is trying to send an email through the system to contact Akia saying, hey, this isn't it. It gets blocked by evil Mina. She then ends up injuring herself. She ends up falling, knocking herself out. That leads to Akia rushing to her side, which allows for Akia to notice the eyes, and it shows a really cool scene where evil Mina goes into the other room and is like, get the recording, pull it up, and watching their eyes, and they're like, where are the eyes going? And they're looking where the eyes, and they realize that they're spelling out words, and it's saying, hey, this isn't the Mina that you know, and then Akia just disappears. And that's where they go on a game of cat and mouse to try and find Akia, to stop him from running away so that he can go find the real Mina. Evil Mina gives him an option, saying, give me what you were going to give to her and I'll give you the world. I love this exit. It reminds me of Batman. I know that's a bit of a weird thing to say, but in Batman, there is a scene where he is planning an escape plan, which is one of those where you get like a parachute and it flies him into the air and a plane comes across and it collects him and takes him away, where he's in China, grabbing someone to take back to America. That's pretty much what happens in this. He's at the top of the roof, he's got a balloon, he floats the balloon off, plane flies over, and then hooks him off and flies away. It is brilliant. And even evil Mina is just kind of like taken away. It's like, yeah, you know what, that was clever. It is a very good way of having these events play out piece by piece by piece. But there is also a bit of a miniaturized section in there where you're going over good Mina and her being captured, her escaping, her being taken sort of refuge by a single parent mother who kind of works in less than great situations. It goes into this conversation of wanting to be turned. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a separate part, but it was just a sort of situation of she escapes, she's making the run for it, people are willing to help her, she's kind of injured, she's hurt, she's weak, but it ends up leading to a situation where she ends up getting recaptured, and she's just saying, don't hurt them, I'll come quietly. If you just let them, they're like, yep, that's fine, we won't hurt the others that have helped you, but you're coming with us. And it really still shows that Mina, even in her most vulnerable situations, still cares about doing the right thing, being good in its most pure sense, which also has been noted throughout the many volumes. That is also her greatest weakness. After those events, we lead into Akira going on the hunt. He's looking for Mina, and there's this whole situation where he bumps into someone. They say, hey, I'm gonna save you from being killed, and then they fake his death, which ends up getting back to Mina as, oh, you have actually died. And the person that breaks the news is the student council president's little lover boy. He has decided to turn tails. He's decided to join the other team because the way he sees it, Mina betrayed him. Mina told to attack her, push her, and that led to her death in his eyes, which is later on exposed as the person that helped Akira do all of this breaking Mina out is her. She did actually in fact survive. She has come back to help save, and so did the maids as well. The maids end up coming there. They kind of say, hey, you know what, you can convert us over to your side, but we just want to serve Mina. But of course they always had a plan to end up saving Mina Tepish, which is what it all leads into, is that Mina Tepish needs to be saved. But there is a lot of stuff that's going on here, and there's a lot of little things that have kind of been delved into, particularly when it comes to the world building of this universe, and that is to do with sort of like the firstborns, like the trueborns, like the original vampires themselves, and finding out that Rosman has his own cradle with this like really cool architecture. It's like Aztec style looking buildings, like blood cult, which makes sense for vampires, and that leads into the El Dorado, I think is how you pronounce it, or E-L space D-O-R-A-D-O. Necropolitus. My pronunciations are always terrible, so bear with me on that. And then finding out the secret of the story, like the 99 sons and the one daughter, which is this sort of situation of, yeah, a certain vampire has 99 sons, one daughter, and says, you are going to be the heir of the vampire empire, and you are only ever going to have daughters. Your daughter will have a daughter of a daughter of a daughter of a daughter of a daughter. And that leads into the discovery of someone being down there, which looks exactly like Mina Tepish. It's just like that constant, like, kind of, it almost just looks like clones of clones, but it's that long line of a daughter of a daughter of a daughter of a daughter, and it all just kind of feels like they're all the same. And that is where it ends on volume 12. So we get into the final parts of this video, which is covering volumes 13 and 14, which is pretty straightforward. It continues off from volume 12 itself, from the whole situation going on within the actual Bund from the other Bund, not the actual Bund that Mina has, but the other one that has been just discovered, and the one that also has, as we find out, basically the original queen of the vampires. And that is like the great-great-great-great-grandmother of Mina Tepish, which is why Mina points out that it looks just like her mother. It's very obvious that each line of new daughter looks pretty much or very similar to the original, almost like they look like clones, but they are different in themselves, which kind of just shows that constant, almost like genetic copy going beyond that is needed to then be the next queen or the bearer of the next daughter of one of the other vampire clans, which is why the others got very angry that she kind of rebelled against it, much like her mother, as previously mentioned in the last section of this video. We then have the whole escape plan. We have the old wolf guard rocking up saying, hey, we want to be let go from your guard so we can do our final, give our life for the original queen herself and hold them off so that Mina, good Mina, can finally escape. This is also when we find out about also Aki's new form as well, and just kind of seeing more of it, seeing him in action, seeing this sort of power upgrade, and it is a pretty cool look as well, which leads into the question of why is not Akira being more affected by Mina's blood, which clearly we will find out at a later point in the story, but at this point in time there is no explaining that currently. Then you get to the whole situation where Mina has returned. She has declared herself. She's saying, I'm here, I'm fighting back, and there's a massive confrontation going on. But there's also the fact that evil Mina is trying to turn the humans and the vampires on each other and trying to stoke a conflict between the people and the vampires and trying to get them to turn against each other. And Mina, as of course, evil Mina has been discovered throughout this to be the one behind stirring this, creating this problem, and making it worse as time goes on. But she's also been very busy looking for artifacts, the lost history of the vampires. And that is where it leads to her going to Fuji to go into another cradle as well to see what hidden relics, what hidden knowledge that could give evil Mina what she so desperately desires, which she ends up finding out at the end of all of this that it isn't there. She ends up getting into a confrontation with good Mina. It's good Mina and Arkia versus evil Mina, and evil Mina definitely has a very... At one point it looked like a crab because it has a pincer kind of thing, but it's more like a worm kind of thing, a crab claw kind of attack. Very crazy kind of form. Good Mina, bad Mina fighting, and then as bad Mina is getting defeated, she ends up getting swept away by someone else, which was, of course, as we go all the way back to earlier on in the story where we have the werewolf story, the saga situation, the girl known as Tadanina, which is the sister of one of the boys from that saga situation that was killed by Arkia. That is her that ends up saving evil Mina from this fight. She gets away, don't know where she's gone, but she has escaped somewhere else to return at a later point. We also have the whole fight that was going on previously before that. So that whole escaping Mina thing is sort of like the end of the actual volume 14, but in between that you have the fight going on at the Bund. Everything's breaking out. There's like a civil war kind of situation. People are turning against each other. People are picking their sides of evil Mina and bad Mina. And then you've got Alphonse, who we go for a bit of a backstory of him, where you find out his connection with Mina, their relationship, and him trying to come to terms with who is the real Mina. And that is something he talks about with Arkia, is that it can be very challenging knowing which one is the good one, or which one is, should I say, the real one, not so much the good one, but in their eyes, yeah, the one that they have loyalty to is their good one, but they have a struggle to work out who that one is because of the fact that it's, to them, it's indistinguishable. But for Arkia, it's very different. And they kind of go over a bit of the concept of love in this, and Alphonse really delves into this whole idea that he fell in love with Mina as a young child, but then when he ends up having to change into his form to protect her at a point in his life, that's where his love changes. And it's almost like this kind of like biological blood oath where it's no longer he can love her, it's a love of loyalty, a love of I have to be by your side, and that's the thing that it tries to delve into. And it's kind of complicated to explain the concept of two different forms of love when it comes to how Dance of the Vampire Bund goes into this, because from a basic level for most people, and for how Arkia sees Mina, is it is just love, companionship, a desire to be by her side, a desire to love her, hold her, be with her for all of time, to what we would see as love in itself, to grow old, to be there, but in this case Mina being immortal, we look at it as the most pure sense of love. That's the way Arkia sees it. But for Alphonse, it is very different. It's almost, it started off as genuine love, how we would see it, but then it turns into loyalty love, where it's, yes, he does love Mina, but in a sense that he can never truly love her the way that he used to. It changes into almost like a blood pact, a blood oath, a desire to protect and see her wish through, which is where he kind of explains that, yeah, it's a very complicated situation. It is hard to distinguish between the two, but it's hard to disobey that queen that you're not even sure who it is. And that's where it kind of leads it off to be. Something that I think it's more of a, you'd have to read it yourself and see the full context of the whole fight and the situation, but I feel like I explain it pretty decently well. It goes from love in a pure sense of what Arkia sees into a loyalty love of what the people do, which also leads into this question of, can any of her people actually love her in any capacity beyond what that is? Because the way they see her as the queen, it's like, for example, and this is a bit of a wild one, it's like Dharmachi with Belle and Hestia. Hestia has a very different sense of love when it comes to loving her children, and Belle sees her as a goddess, as someone that he can't love in the sense of companionship. love in its very different form and how people sort of perceive it. It's like loving a family member kind of thing, where it's like you love them, you care for them, but there's nothing really romantic beyond just caring for them in a sense of loyalty and bloodline. That is how I see Mina Tepish's people and anyone that is a vampire loving her, is that they can never truly love her in the sense of romantic companionship. They can only love her as if family, and seeing her as a queen that they love and worship. And that's why Mina can never really be loved by her own people in the truest sense of what Akia feels towards and what she feels for him, which is why Alphonse points out that he is basically the chosen one to be her true companion, as what they would all hope, and why he was sort of trained, given a bit of tough love by him. And I think it's a very interesting, touching part to the story, as kind of leading to the end of volume 14, and this massive big part of the, I would say, stage 1 of the story is this realization of these different meanings, these different dark secrets going on within the vampire society itself, and then also the final image, someone standing above the body of the original queen of the vampires, and who that person could be. And it leads into where this story goes. And that's the one thing I love about The Dance in the Vampire Bund, the manga itself, is that there is a deep lore, and it has a lot of connections to real world lore that it kind of ties into to kind of connect it all together, and connecting parts of the world of like the Amazon, Fuji, Japan, all these different locations, and it all just kind of making sense, the world feeling bigger and bigger and bigger, grander and grander and grander, and all these characters playing intricate, interesting roles amongst each other, and some being seen as evil but still kind of having noble goals, and some being good but having very stupid goals that end up leading to their downfall. These characters are not one-dimensional, they are multi-layered. They have their own personal dreams and goals and desires, but they also have their own way of serving Mina Tepish as well. Some that you may not agree with, but it still adds for an interesting layer of complexity when it comes to these characters, and they at least explain it in a way that, for at least for me, I understand. But I feel like Dance in the Vampire Bund is a story that is not easy to palate, because it is got far more complex characters, far more complex topics that are delved into, and especially when it comes to certain characters that are of a certain ages, they're in love with certain other characters and certain appearances, definitely leading to questions that I think a lot of people from an outside, younger anime fans would not be able to delve into due to the complexity of these characters, which is why I leave it to the end of the video, because most of those people would not watch this far. This is a far more touchier type series, a series that I would never actually want to see ever get a remake. I do not want to see Dance in the Vampire Bund ever get a remake of the original series, because I think this is a story that deserves to be left untarnished and untouched by the mainstream consumer base, because there are so many cool concepts that are delved into, so many cool ties to the world building, the character building, that I think deserves to have its own niche audience for. That is the end of volume 14, going through this major saga, major step of the first bit of the Dance in the Vampire Bund, and I ask the question off to you. Have you read it? What are your thoughts? Who are your favorite characters? What drew you into the Dance in the Vampire Bund? And if you would consider hitting a like, leaving a comment, and if you really want to, subscribe and consider checking out the Patreon to support this kind of content, because these kinds of videos are far more intensive, far more long form, and take a lot more effort for me to make. So I really would appreciate any type of support that you can muster. But if you like this video, hit the like, subscribe, and I will see you, beautiful nerds, in the next video.